Hey there guys, my name is Joe and today I'm going to show you how to install Untitled roofing panels on this shipping container shop. It's probably not the most common project that you'll see out there, but I think you'll find the general installation guidelines are easily translatable to almost any project that you might have. So let's get some tools together and we'll get started.
The tools you'll need for this build are pretty darn simple. Some safety glasses, a tape measure, a string line, a hammer, and a utility knife or a saw to cut the panels. And for materials, you'll just need the panels in the color of your choice, some foam closure strips, some fasteners, and a matching ridge cap.
Before mounting your panels, you're going to want to consider what roofing surface you're going to be mounting them to. In general, you're going to have two different options. One is going to be using horizontally spaced purlins like in this portion of the project, and the other is going to be using a solid decking surface of at least 1/2 inch plywood with an appropriate weather underlayment. In the instance of purlins, you're going to want to make sure to use at least 1 inch thick boards and space them according to the pitch or slope of your roof. Anything above a 3-inch rise within a 12-inch run is going to have 24-inch on center purlins, and anything flatter than that, you're going to want to consider spacing your purlins at 18-inch on center or 12-inch on center, and anything even flatter than that or a structure that is going to have an interior ceiling, you should use a solid decking surface of at least 1/2 inch plywood with an appropriate weather underlayment.
To begin this installation, you'll first start out by laying your panels on your roof surface. The panels should have approximately 1 3/4 inch overhang, and to make this a really simple job as well as keep the panels on the roof, you can use some temporary brackets like I've installed here. Once that's complete, you can then use a string line to identify where your purlins are and give you a guide for placing your fasteners. Next, you'll want to install your foam closure strips underneath the first row of fasteners. This will help keep squirrels, birds, and any other critters out of the corrugations. You can now begin placing your first row of fasteners. I like to start them by hand and then hammer them in later. The bottom rows of fasteners will be placed at every corrugation, and intermediate rows can be placed every other corrugation. Any cuts that need to be made to the panels can be accomplished with a standard circular saw or a utility knife.
So we finished our first row, now we're going to start on the second row, and there's just a couple of things we need to remember. One is that we don't want any of the vertical seams to align, much like roofing with shingles, so we're going to stagger them. This happens to be the cutoff section from the first row, and I'm just starting with this, that way none of the seams will align. And then for overlaps, we want to make sure our overlaps center over the purlins, and that there's at least 3.5 inches on either side of the fastener to make at least a 7-inch overlap.
Another thing to note is that the panel should be installed towards the windward side of the structure so that any overlaps face away from the predominant winds. In addition to a string line, a ledger board can also be used in placing the fasteners in straight rows. Rows of fasteners should be placed at every corrugation on overlapping panels, and intermediate courses can have one every other corrugation. But if you are in a high wind area, you should consider putting fasteners at every corrugation on all rows. When placing your ridge caps, you'll first begin by placing your foam closure strips, and then the fasteners should be placed from one end of the ridge cap and worked to the other end. To close up the ends of the ridge cap, you'll first start by cutting a slit down the center of the ridge cap and then folding the two flaps over and securing them down with 2 washered nails. Here's a little closer look on a chicken coop project that I did a while back on how this is done. For the awning section of the shop, the process of installation is pretty much the same except for the fact that this is a solid decking surface and the fasteners don't have to line up with purlins. The awning will, however, be attached to a vertical wall and flashing will have to be used to achieve a weather-tight transition. You should check with your local codes and the ONDURA installation guide to see what specific flashing requirements might be needed for your specific project. And just like with the ridge cap, the foam closure strips should be installed to achieve a weather-tight seal.
When finishing out the edges of your roof, there are a few different options you can use to get both a weather-tight seal as well as a nice clean finished look. The first option is to allow your fascia board to extend slightly higher than your roof deck and up into the final corrugation of roofing. A second option is to use a traditional metal flashing like I've done on the front of the shop to give a clean finished drip edge. A third option is to cut a single corrugation off of one of your panels and use that in the form of a flashing by tucking underneath the edge of the roofing and fastening to the fascia board. And the final option is to use extra ridge caps to wrap the edge of the roofing and the fascia board in a total wrapping fashion to give a superior weather-tight seal. If you're still in the planning phases of building your roof, one thing to take note of is that the panels have corrugations every 4 inches, meaning if you have a roof surface that is divisible by 4, you'll end up with one of the valleys of the corrugations perfectly lined up with the edge of your roof. All you'd have to do then is just cut and fasten. However, if you have an existing roof or a roof that isn't quite divisible by 4, it's also kind of cool to remember that these panels have a certain amount of flexibility. So if you're an inch shorter or an inch longer than you need to be, you can simply compress the panels a little bit or stretch them out to make that custom fit on the edge of your roof.
And if you find the need to remove any of the washer nails from the panels, here is the proper way to do so without damaging the panels. If you'd prefer not to install your foam closure strips at roof level, you can pre-install your fasteners and simply place the closure strips on the fasteners for a ready-to-go panel. And if you need to get up on the roof for any sort of work or simply better access when installing the panels, a board like this can make getting up on the roof without damaging the panels much easier.
One quick tip that may be helpful to you when you're getting ready to finish off your ridge caps with the folded ends is to make sure you have a warm enough outside air temperature. If it's too cool, these ends may not fold over nicely and they could have some splitting in the paint. One trick that I found helpful is to use a standard hair dryer. I stole this one from my wife, and simply warm the areas that you're planning on folding, and it's going to give you a nice clean fold and you won't have any splitting of the paint. Well guys, it's all finished now and I'm very happy with the way it turned out. I hope this was a helpful video for any project that you may be getting ready to start on. And for any further questions or details that might be more specific to your particular project, be sure and check out one of these ONDURA installation guides. And until then, thanks for watching and good luck on your project.